Uh, Good evening. My name is RajRamadhin. I am doing a project with Bash and AlexanderMartin on WEP and WPA2 Wi-Fi password security and exploiting IP-based surveillance cameras.
So this is Alex. Just as an introduction, with the growing advancement of the Internet of Things, everything being connected via networks, Wi-Fi networks, we have to take a look at the security of these networks and their associated devices to determine the threats in this rapidly growing field of technology. Everything from surveillance cameras to household appliances are now on your wireless network. And as these devices continue to grow in popularity, so too does the threat that they pose to your security. Originally, this project was going to be about IP-based cameras, but now it's kind of expanded into WEP and WPA2 security, as well as some of the measures to take some of these IoT devices offline. Um, since we are going to be cracking WEP and WPA2 passwords, there is of course, some definitions we can go over, such as encryption, hashing, and salting. The encryption, of course, is scrambling information so that somebody with the corresponding key can decrypt that information. It protects the data with the intent to later decrypt that data. Whereas hash it uses an algorithm to map that data. So basically, there is no cipher, um, and you can't really tell what it could be based on um, the actual hash itself. It's always going to be the same length. And assault is a way to um, basically add an extended layer of protection to a hash to throw off any attempts at decrypting that using the decryption algorithm or cracking algorithm. Here's that kind of broken down into a pictograph or some sort of picture. And you can see here at the bottom that your typical hash might have an additional amount of information added at the end, which would, of course, throw off an attempt to crack that particular hash. Here's some password information. Of course, as you gain more complexity in your passwords, your security, of course, increases as well. As we are looking at cracking passwords, we are going to most likely be using somewhat basic passwords to make the actual cracking of those passwords viable in the context of a classroom. Something like a brute force or a dictionary attack can take quite a long time with a more hardened password. Here's a couple of different ways to attack passwords. We're going to be actually utilizing some of these. Some of these are pretty obvious, such as shoulder surfing, password guessing. We are going to be using a dictionary attack, more specifically a list attack using a file called rocku.txt. It seems to be the standard for these types of attack. RockU was a website back in the 2000s that had a data breach, and they kept all their password information basically in plain text. So because they kept their password information and had such a huge volume of that information, it's become the go-to for these types of list attacks moving into the future. I'm sorry, this is actually Raj's slide, so he's going to go over what we want to accomplish.
Thank you. What we want to accomplish is we want to be able to research WEP and WPA encryptions, see what's making WPA2 more secure than WEP. So, and then to follow up with that, we're gonna crack passwords on a WEP network and a WPA2 network. We're gonna use Kali Linux, Airmon, and AirCrack most likely, and we want to compare the time on how long it takes to crack those passwords at different lengths, and we'll have the hardware listed out that we're using too for it. And then we want to try to implement these attacks in a real world situation. So we want to try to set up a test environment with the WEP network and the WPA2 network, try to capture the enough packets and be able to decrypt the password and probably try to get into an IP camera as well. So what is WEP? WEP is called the Wired Equivalency Privacy. It was meant to provide security of wired LAN with the accessibility of being wireless. It was introduced in 1997 and fully implemented in 1999. It uses RC4 algorithm for encryption. It's a 40-bit long key with a 24-bit initialization vector, and eventually transitioned over to a 128-bit and then a 256-bit, but the standard is the 128-bit. There were a few failed versions of WEP trying to implement it and keep it alive. WEP 2 and WEP Plus, which WEP Plus was then followed by the beginning of WPA. So what is WPA2? It's the Wi-Fi protection access, Wi-Fi protected access. So it was introduced in 2004, and it came with the fully implemented in 802.11i, and it substituted the original WPA, which substituted WEP, and it uses AES encryption and is backwards compatible with WPA. It utilizes advanced encryption standard. Yep. So the pros and cons of WPA2, it's not susceptible to all the attacks of WEP. It's still vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks, but with WEP you could access the network without knowing the encryption key, and we'll go over more vulnerabilities in our final project. And WPA2 is also vulnerable to crack attacks due to the 802.11i standard.
So our goals of this project are to actually perform 4 different exploits. As we continue to look into this information, of course, a lot of the exploits that we're going to be doing, the ways in which we perform them are going to change. That's the nature of just finding out more information. But we plan on, of course, cracking a WEP, WEP Wi-Fi password protection. We plan on cracking WPA2 Wi-Fi password protection. We're going to perform a deauthentication attack to kick some of these IoT devices off of their networks and disable them. And then we are going to very shortly demonstrate the importance in updating an IP-based surveillance camera default username and password. Because in our findings, a lot of the exploits on these cameras are simple as using a default username and password and a public IP to gain access to some of these devices. And basically, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to set up a test environment with WEP and WPA2 password protected wireless routers. We're going to crack WEP. We have some options for this. I think one of the ways in which we want to try WEP is using a tool called Wi-Fi. It's a Kali Linux tool. It's automated, so it actually does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, and we'll actually show how that's going to work. In addition to that, we're going to crack WPA2, and we're going to do this using some of the more hands-on ways of actually cracking these networks. So we're going to use the AirCrack and its suite of tools, including Airmon, to monitor, find networks, possibly cause a deauthentication to force a handshake. We're going to capture that handshake, the 4-way handshake that WPA2 utilizes to gain access to that capture. And then using that information, we're actually going to put that information into a password cracking software or password cracking tool in Kali Linux, such as Hashcat, to take that information and be able to find out what our password is. And of course, once you have that password, you can go ahead and plug that password in and connect to the network as you normally would. And then one of the other things that we plan on doing is showing a bash script that was used as a result of actually something that happened in 2015 where Airbnb hosts were found to be putting hidden surveillance cameras in their houses and rented apartments and etc. This was seen as a breach of privacy. So some entrepreneuring programmers actually went ahead and created a program that was a simple bash script that would scan for these devices and deauthenticate them, which would bring them off of their network and disable them. So we're actually going to show you that. It's called Dropkick. That's just the name of the bash script. So with that, we hope to show you kind of the full suite of gaining access to Wi-Fi and, of course, removing devices from that network. And then, of course, here is our citations. We can't be with you in class today, but we hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know. And that's it.